Am I on? Hello. So we're going to get to our panel introductions in just a second, but first to kind of set the stage with some definitions. What is SMB OS, you might be wondering. So I've been coming to these conferences for a while, and I've been an analyst covering the local space since around 2004. And it seems that the discussion at conferences, in industry discussions, in editorial, always seems to focus in on advertising. So campaign optimization, ad sales, all these things that are of course very important to us. But to kind of expand that opportunity, one thing that we've been looking at a lot in the last 5 years or so, and some people even longer than that, is to expand beyond customer acquisition, advertising, to the broader range of functions that help SMBs not only acquire customers, but to serve them and keep them. So it's everything from back office, accounting, payroll, scheduling. There's, things that tie in with marketing. They're separate too, but related to marketing and advertising. And there are a few different advantages there. There are several that we're going to go over. Three I'll highlight at the front end is, number one, the timing is right. In the age of the cloud, the ability to deliver really robust functionality in a kind of SaaS packaged manner makes it easily deployable by SMBs. It's cash flow friendly in its kind of monthly pricing. The second advantage is it makes it so that vendors can get a better lock-in effect. So advertising, SMB advertising, is famously high churn. When you lock in at kind of deeper operational levels, some of these kind of mission critical functions that I mentioned earlier that we're going to go over really helps for that retention. And then number three, the actual addressable market expands vastly when you go beyond advertising into all of these other SMB functions. So the quick math there is that local advertising is roughly $150 billion in the US, but a third of that is SMBs. This broader SMB OS kind of segment and this construct we're talking about, I was talking to the Tech Adoption Index guys the other day, Neil Polachek and Charles Laughlin, to kind of, roughly size that. And when you add up all of those pieces of all of the addressable markets of all those software functions in operational support, you quickly get up to like approaching $1 trillion in SMB spend. So that overall pie and the addressable market grows. So our panel is attacking this from all different angles. So we're going to hear from them and kind of talk about what some of the strategic imperatives are here, and we'll go from there. So if I could have each of you introduce yourselves and your companies briefly, and then we'll go a bit deeper. First, quick intros, and then we'll kind of find out what you're each up to. So why don't we start with you, Nadine?
Am I on?
Are you on? Yep.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Mm-hmm. Hi, I'm Nadine Paz with Cisco Systems. I work in the global service provider side of Cisco. So our mandate is to build simple IT franchises within the service provider space.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Great.
Ilir?
Awesome. Thank you for having me here. Ilir, Sela, founder, CEO of Slice. We are the largest network of local pizzerias nationwide. We work with over 10,000 pizza restaurants across the country in 2,500 cities and towns. So today, more locations than Domino's and Papa John's combined. And what we do is we empower local pizzerias with technology, marketing, and data to ultimately help them win the category, but also shift $27 billion in consumer transactions today happening via telephone, shift that over to digital. As we know, that's ultimately going to happen, whether it's tomorrow or 10 years from now. And that's our focus, growing very quickly. Excited to be here.
Great. My name's Angus Davis. I'm the founder and CEO of Upserve. We provide the leading restaurant management platform. We primarily work with full-service restaurants, so a little bit different than the pizzeria segment. We work with thousands of restaurants across the U.S. to provide them with point of sale. Our point of sale system is called Breadcrumb, analytics through Upserve HQ, and payments. And today, the restaurants we're working with are running over 13 billion, I believe, in annual volume on the platform. And really, our vision is to be the magic ingredient that helps restaurateurs run smoother shifts, make smarter decisions, and provide a better guest experience.
Nice. And it's kind of my failing, but one thing I was hoping to do and kind of didn't get it together in time is to have an Oprah moment for all of you with a pizza box care of Slice under everyone's seat, but we'll do that next time. So to go one level deeper into kind of what you guys are each doing, where does your suite of services begin and end for SMBs, just to kind of level set a little more at the front end? You know, it's very vast. It's probably going to take a while to kind of go down the list, but if not the exhaustive list, some of the highlights of the things that you guys each offer in terms of the breadth of that suite, where it begins and ends. Nadine?
So Cisco has made a number of cloud acquisitions over the last 7-8 years. Number one, I think, in the market is Meraki. So Meraki, which is security, Wi-Fi, infrastructure, switching, routing, all that piece, but all cloud managed. We also made an acquisition called Umbrella, which is open DNS. And then we most recently made an acquisition called BroadSoft. So all three of those cloud-based offers are really what we're basing our simple IT franchises on. And for the most part, our partners tend to deploy them the same way. So what we're trying to do is take our complex infrastructure, break it down into small type packages that the service providers can roll out to SMB customers and sell on a reoccurring monthly type revenue stream. So basically we address the infrastructure underneath the applications that these guys drive. So we provide the analytics and the quality and the control and all those pieces that you need to be able to leverage these applications the way you need to and drive different customer experience.
That makes sense. And before we move on, it's pretty well defined in terms of SMB size of business with you guys, because it's restaurants, pizza shops. It's probably a little bit more broadly defined for you. How do you guys see the SMB opportunity in terms of either headcount or revenue?
It's a funny question because, I mean, we're global, so SMB is very different in different parts of the world. I'm personally from Canada, so I think the whole country is SMB. I think I heard 99% of Canada is SMB, because the way Cisco looks at SMB is anywhere from like 2 users to 1,000, right? So that's our SMB space. Typically what we tend to, our sweet spot is in the 50 to 250 space is kind of where we tend to spend most of our time with our service providers, because that's our, what we call white space. It's areas where Cisco's had a harder time directly going down market into. So what we do is we work with the service provider partners to drive out these franchises that they can sell, and really little touch from Cisco. So the whole idea is work with product management, productize the solution, put it in a digital format so people can easily consume it. We can work with partners like these guys and try to build an integrated vertical offer that is very low touch from a Cisco perspective.
So Ilir, breadth of services. You guys are doing menus, order leveraging for supplies, all kinds of things. Where does that begin and end?
Yeah, so to summarize it, and I'll give you a quick 30 seconds on the pizza industry. It's a $45 billion category in the US. Does not include pizza sold at 7-Eleven or Costco or DiGiorno. This is from pizza restaurants, 75,000 to be exact. And the category is divided into two parts. You have what I call big pizza on one side, that's Domino's, Pizza Hut, Papa John's, Little Caesars. And then you have the local segment on the other. And so the local segment really outnumbers the big pizza chains combined, 3 to 1 in terms of locations, 2 out of 3 in terms of revenue. And so, but when you look at the digital side of the business, you have the big chains that are now processing 65, approaching 70% of their order volume, not specifically just delivery, but of all transactions via digital channels, multi-channel approach. And what we do is we bring that big pizza playbook to the local segment. Our mission internally is uniting local pizza. And so we believe that we're really empowering these local SMBs, not only with the technology in terms of world-class websites. We then publish them across Google, Facebook, Instagram, and really wherever consumers are. Google Assistant, I believe, launching soon. Excited about that. And then what are some other things that we can bring across in terms of getting buying power and economies of scale for small businesses? So kind of eliminating the downsides of being part of a franchise company, but really bringing all the benefits that franchisees for a Domino's or a Papa John's would see. And so we're starting to, move on the supply side in terms of whether that's, menus and pizza boxes that are launching actually today in the New York CBSA. So you'll start getting your local pizza in a sliced pizza box, which is awesome. But then again, some back of the house, very early workflow management, software, not necessarily a POS, but really very much consumer facing. So the goal is to make sure that we work together to, again, shift all of this consumer behavior that's already coming through the pizza shops from phone to digital.
Yeah, and the supply side stuff is interesting. We spoke about this, a quick plug for the Street Fight podcast, where Ilir and I had a nice discussion on our last episode. You can find that on the Street Fight website. But one of the things that you mentioned I thought was very interesting, particularly with that supply side stuff, is that when you look at a typical kind of franchise model, there are pros and cons. And one of the pros is the operational support from a main entity. It's some of that supply chain stuff. It's, ordering leverage for pizza boxes, all kinds of things. But the downside is, they kind of screw with your recipe. If you look at like a Domino's, you're kind of given the best of both worlds with some of that operational support, yet they can preserve their authenticity.
Yeah, exactly. I call the model a reverse franchise, or really what we are is just a massive chain composed of local shops. I do believe in authenticity, and we champion that, and we champion the hyperlocal brands, which are the SMBs. And our team has done a phenomenal job at creating a brand that lives next to these hyperlocal brands. So it's really, think about Joe's Pizza, but part of the Slice family. Mm-hmm. And so by doing that, then we have the ability to bring these restaurants or owners together. The pizza industry is massive, but it's a very small community. And owners actually do seek out help, and they like working together, sharing recipes in some cases. Or I heard of a case where one owner sent an employee to a nearby pizza shop to get pepperoni because they ran out. And so it is very much a community. Our job is to then, now as a next step, put all of these owners on a platform so that we can really unite the entire category and then drive some of those economies of scale.
Mm-hmm. So Angus, same question about like the breadth of the offering. You mentioned POS, but then that ties in nicely to other things that you're offering, analytics and all kinds of things.
Right, yeah, I think about it two different ways. One is the range of product functionality, and the other is who the buyer is, who the market is. Within the US, every day, 1 out of every 10 Americans in the workforce shows up to work at a restaurant. It's actually one of the largest private sector employers, second only to the healthcare industry. And Americans spend more now dining out at restaurants than they spend cooking food at home, over $800 billion a year. There's about 1 million restaurants in the US, and they range from very fancy, high-end, Michelin-rated restaurants to the person selling hot dogs on the corner. Our focus is full-service restaurants, which means waiters and waitresses. There's about 280,000 such restaurants in the US. That's our sweet spot. And in terms of where our value prop begins and ends for them today, we're always trying to expand that value prop over time. It starts at the core with our breadcrumb point-of-sale system. That's essentially the second most important piece of equipment in the restaurant, the first being whatever you're using to heat up the food. And so that's absolutely essential in coordinating the show between what's happening at the front of the house with the waiters and wait staff with the back of the house. But it's also being used for some ways we don't always appreciate. For example, most of the folks working in a restaurant are hourly workers, and they're using our system to clock in and clock out. So we're not only the system that's being used to coordinate the orders to the kitchen, we're also the labor management system, and we're also the system that's handling typically 80 to 90% of all the payments that are flowing through that restaurant in terms of the credit card payments, as well as we handle, of course, the cash, which is the remaining 10 to 20%. Some things we don't do today that we would like to do more of in the future are areas where we do things around the ordering, the supply chain management. And then the other area I would say that's important is the workforce management area. So we aren't doing as much with that. When it comes to online ordering, which is what Slice is focused on, we've taken the approach of partnering with the market-leading providers, as well as having kind of our own in-house, simple kind of, if you want to run your own online ordering system, you can. The market is really defined by a large number of legacy players who haven't updated, they haven't kept up with the times. In some cases, one of the large players, Micros, after being acquired by Oracle, actually essentially abandoned the market. And so restaurateurs in general are about 10 years behind where other verticals are in terms of their adoption of digital technologies. And that's even more pronounced, as Ilir was saying, in the local segment. Yeah. Pizza actually has a greater share of the big name brands than full service restaurants are even more local, and they're even more left behind of some of the digital transformation that's occurred in other parts of our economy. So there's a strong need to get access to these new technologies and a huge addressable market.
Ilir, what did you say? Wasn't pizza like 60-40 national versus the independents?
Yeah, in terms of locations, it's 25% are the big chains combined.
Oh, got it. So
75% of the locations are the local segment. Vast majority of that is independents. And then in terms of revenue, 2/3 is local, so a third is. So really, the big chains are processing more transactions on a per store basis, and that has been driven by digital adoption.
better technology.
Yeah. So 8 years ago it was pretty even. Now it's, you have the big chains that are doing over $1 million per store in terms of sales on an annual basis.
So Angus, you use the word essential, and I want to kind of drill down on that a bit, because that goes back to one of the points I made in the intro of kind of retention. I think that retention's like a key topic for everyone in this room, because it's always been a pain point with SMBs in terms of churn rates. And I think that, when you're talking about something that's that essential, it's day-to-day mission critical. Not only that, that kind of creates a lock-in effect, and I always feel like the word lock-in is a bit like disingenuous. Not only that, but it's something that is top of mind in terms of the perceived ROI of the small business, because they're seeing it, they're touching it on a day-to-day basis. So do you guys disclose in any way, like your churn rates or retention, or just even in general terms, what you're seeing in terms of, that key metric?
Yeah,
Angus, you can go first.
at Upserve, we're proud to have over 100% net revenue retention, and we believe that's a critically important metric, and one that is pretty unusual within the SMB sector. I would say half of the customers that we lose, at minimum, a majority of them that we lose, it's because unfortunately they go out of business. Yeah. And the SMB sector, traditionally, it's been challenging for a few reasons. One is it's a costly sector to sell into. If you look, for example, at the way OpenTable grew their restaurant base from 0 to 25,000, that was done largely through a feet on the street sales force, so very expensive customer acquisition cost. And then to your point about churn or retention, if you're selling a service that's marketing like an advertising thing, like say a Yelp ad, let's just take that as an example, what's going through the restaurateur's mind is, okay, I guess, I did coupons the last 3 months. For the next 3 months, I'll try Yelp. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And then some other sales rep calls her, and 3 months from now, and she's like, well, Yelp was okay. I'll do, all right, I'll cancel Yelp, and I'll start spending it on Google now. And so when you have multiple vendors and an easily shifted spend, that's how you're going to get the churn problem. And I think that's why you've seen, businesses like Living Social, for example, crash and burn. I think when you're providing the operating system on which that small business runs, like what Ilir is building for pizza restaurants, what we're trying to build for full service restaurants. By the way, we're using Meraki infrastructure underneath. We've learned that we'll get blamed if the router isn't working, so we might as well supply it. Even if we didn't supply it, it's our fault. So we're going to supply it. So if you can supply the actual operating system on which that business runs, that's typically a single vendor, not a multi-vendor decision, and it's a big decision. It's not, every 3 months you're going to try a new operating system.
Same question to you guys. Go ahead.
Our go-to-market strategy is a little different. So we tend to use service providers, right, as our channel, and they tend to provide reoccurring revenue streams for their end user customers based upon contracts, right? So we have a nice contractual type obligation there that often helps with the retention piece of it. But what we found, and we have to drive this into the service provider sales channel, is adoption. So we need to make sure that we can sell the service, but you can't just sell it and forget it. You have to actually help that end user customer leverage the analytics, leverage the network to be able to drive different outcomes within their business so that they can change business processes, for example. Because if you look at, what we call them cloud natives, the millennials, that they're typically tech savvy, right? And they're also very fickle. They'll move very quickly, like you're talking about. So how do you engage that type of a customer and then help them drive their business the way they want to. You have to have a sticky type infrastructure that makes sense to them. And so we find that by helping them understand the power of the analytics and then potentially partnering with guys like Upserve and Slice and kind of creating more of a vertical approach. So we try to look at it as an ecosystem. So we provide the infrastructure underneath, and then we provide partnerships with applications that drive a vertical differentiated guest experience. And we have to get to that level of granularity so that we don't lose the customer, right? And have it erode or have it so that they don't want to buy the service in 3 years from now when it comes up for renewal. So we're trying to really start at the base roots of this and kind of look at it as almost like a new business venture within Cisco, and really kind of figure out how to help our service providers go out and capture that opportunity. Most of them have to educate themselves on how to sell to small business customers. So they have an inside sales team that needs to be trained and understand the power of the service that they're selling. So we have to help them with that piece of it. And then we bring in ecosystem partners to help them differentiate. So that we find if that happens well, then it sells itself. We don't have to worry about the retention piece of it. It typically runs way longer than they ever thought it was going to, or we refresh as we go.
And then what about support? Is that usually how Angus characterized, where the channel handles that, like through the customer relationship all the way through?
Yeah, like we'll have like a service provider support contract on the back end with that partner, but we spend a ton of time productizing the solution within their environment so that they usually know better than we do. So they spend a lot of time with our Iraqi headquarters and kind of understand the cloud and understand the pieces of it, because they need to integrate it into their solutions, into their offers, and provide some type of service level agreement around it. Because to your point, if it goes down, especially if it's a cloud-based service, customer, like it's a customer that does everything from an application perspective, single point of failure, right? So everything is mission critical from that perspective, and so they do see the value in having a 5 nines type service provider provide that offer to them. It's one of the areas where we do see some kind of respect for the service app piece of it. Like it's not as fickle because they do want to make sure that they're up, right? If they're down, they're out. And so that piece, and I think that's why we're starting to see some traction in this space. But it really needs to be built franchise by franchise, because it's a different model for us and it's a different motion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Ilir, the question of attrition, retention, et cetera.
Yeah, so to Angus's point, you do have turnover in the SMB space. So to give you some specifics around the pizza industry, you have about 3,000 local pizzerias that close up every year, and then 3,100 typically open. So it's usually a plus 100 on a regular basis. And pizza is a staple. It continues to grow by about 2% year over year. So it's, and it exists basically in every single neighborhood around the country. So if we put those aside, one of the things about our model is that we're a completely full service solution. We're not a SaaS business where we have this SaaS fee on a monthly basis. And it's completely self-serve for the owner. And we're not an aggregator or a marketplace where you're charging these SMBs 20 to 35% on a per order basis in order to drive some demand. Incremental typically is how it's sold. And what we are really is, I call it a superpower for pizzerias. And we've removed all friction points in order to really drive value into these SMBs. So as we empower them with a website, publishing those across the internet, managing reviews and ratings and all these things. And really we're the digital partner for a very unsophisticated, non-digital SMB. And we don't charge a penny for any of that unless we drive order volume. And when we do, we charge on a per order basis at this really small flat rate, which then converts these users from typical phone customers that order $18 on average each time to a $30 customer digitized that really then becomes streamlined in the back of the house. And so we've become incredibly sticky. So once we partner with a pizzeria and start driving order volume, I mean, I think of the pizza shops receiving orders on Slice today, I look back in the last 6 months, one restaurant left. Like, it's just our restaurant business is world class, and I think it speaks to the fact that, and this is a philosophy I've taken from day one because I have 34 family and friends that own pizzerias, I have no choice, is that we have to make sure that we make these businesses more successful and not cannibalize them or commoditize them. And so when you do that, I think owners see the value, and we send them payments on a weekly or monthly basis. in some cases $25,000 or $30,000 on a monthly basis. So it's a very powerful solution. It's very sticky.
So Angus, you mentioned that you're constantly looking at ways to kind of expand the suite of offerings where you continue adding things that have synergies. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So I'd like to ask each of you guys, to the extent you can talk about your roadmap, where do you still see gaps where you want to kind of add in functionality?
Well, one thing I'm really excited about that we've just started doing is a partnership with Resy, which is an online reservation system. And one of the things that's really compelling about this for full service restaurants is that traditionally what happens when you show up at a restaurant where you've made a reservation is that the host or hostess that meets you at the door, she or he actually knows a few things about you. Maybe it's a special date night, maybe it's an anniversary, and maybe you've requested a particular table or something to this effect. She knows that, she welcomes you, guides you to your seat, and then that information is lost. And for the next hour, you're sitting there and the waiter or waitress that's basically managing the whole dining experience for the bulk of your time in the restaurant is completely isolated from any knowledge that was contained in the reservation system. Now, some very high-end restaurants that you'd see, James Beard Award-winning, Michelin star type places, which are a tiny, 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 tiny fraction of the overall restaurant market. They will specially train the host. And they will
Welcome
have
back,
him,
Mr. Davis.
Yeah, well, they'll have him or her actually print out the information from the reservation system, carry it over to the waiter, and hand it to him or her to do this knowledge transfer. Now, it is 2018. Are you freaking kidding me? And this is the same thing that's going on in online ordering. In online ordering, you go to a popular restaurant that does a lot of online ordering business, take a look at the end of the bar. There's like 5 tablets sitting there. And what happens when an order comes in from, say, Grubhub or something, is like they walk over, they notice it, and then they go over to the point of sale system and they type that information into the point of sale system. This is not the future we were promised.
Yeah.
Like printing out pieces of paper, retyping something that was already digitized. This is so stupid. So what I'm excited about is let's eliminate all of that. No more typing stuff twice, no more errors in translation, and empower the person in that small business experience. In our industry, it's the waiter or waitress that's at your table, right? Give him or her the tools that they need to provide a really awesome guest experience. So if we know that you're allergic to this, or that you like that, or that it's your special occasion, let's put that right into the point of sale system from the reservation system. And by the way, it's the other way around as well. Who better to find out that you love a particular thing, or that you're allergic to something or whatnot? The waiter or waitress that spent an hour with you, not the hostess that spent 15 seconds.
It's like restaurant CRM, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something I'm really excited about that we've just started doing with Resy for reservations, is that exact integration.
So Ilir, before you answer the roadmap question, something that Angus said reminded me of what you guys are doing, where you're accommodating some of that, old school operational stuff. I mean, you guys are in some cases dealing with even like fax orders and just kind of making it work on the front end.
Yeah, so the fax industry is alive because of Slice, is ultimately what's happening. So pizzerias, pizza shops are the SMBs of SMBs. The vast majority have no point of sale presence in the store. They're running their businesses typically on cash registers, in some cases a pen and a paper. And so, part of our job to make sure that we deliver value instantly to owners in order to get their buy-in towards, the digitization of their business, we removed every barrier. So in some cases, in a lot of cases, we fax the order into the restaurant. In fact, I think 60 or 70% of our order volume is still being faxed. And so, to speak of our roadmap, up until now, we've been really focused on the consumer, the demand side of the business, with a very merchant-centric approach. And as I tell a lot of owners, it's very important that small businesses do what's best for the customer. Traditionally, they still do this today, is they make decisions based on what's best for themselves, not necessarily what's best for the consumer. And so we've really done a great job and worked very hard over the last couple of years to solve for, hey, what's best for the consumer? And we've launched, obviously, world-class iOS, Android apps that are Slice branded, mobile optimized website with online ordering, and publish those across the web, as I mentioned. I think the next phase for us is starting to then tie that into the workflow side of the business. So basically our world needs to meet their world and really get the whole flywheel going. So traditionally with a POS company, you have a very self-serve solution when it comes to online ordering. I think everything else is very streamlined and it's very, very powerful. Unfortunately, online ordering as a tool is just a tool. It's like giving somebody a fishing rod, but they've never fished in their life. And then saying, hey, go be the best fisherman in the world and compete with, Domino's. And so we want to bring this full service solution on the demand side and then meet that with the workflow side for the pizzerias, and then start getting them to really adopt workflow management tools like POS systems, or what we call a slice operating system. That isn't just, for point of sale, it's also around supply side marketplace features, et cetera. So that's our focus next.
Excellent. Nadine, expansion of services to the extent you can talk about it.
Yeah, so I think the most exciting one that we've recently come out with is surveillance. And surveillance isn't something you normally think about from an SMB perspective, but it's actually getting pretty interesting. So, so surveillance meaning, initially people look at it and think, okay, well this will help me with theft, right? So I'm gonna put this in my restaurant and then I'll be able to see who's stealing Pepsis out of the fridge. And reality is they'll never get an ROI in that because it's not that big of a problem, but it does capture that. But what we're seeing is the video surveillance becomes a sensor within the organization to help with operational efficiency as well.
Store layouts, foot traffic, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and like, think about it from a bakery perspective. At the end of the day, everything's sold. Yeah. What's sold quickest? What's the most important product to have on the shelf? And maybe you have 3 bakeries. One of them tends to sell more cupcakes than the other, but how do you know that, right? So you can go back and you can look at it. You can say, okay, well, we sold out of bread by 9 a.m. We need to start making more bread. Or and how do you drive efficiencies into the organization? You can look at the whole flow within the operations and figure out, maybe Bill over here has the best process for being able to do things internally, right? And we can leverage that now that we've been able to see it. So looking at it more from an operational perspective and trying to engage within that customer segment and figure out how do we streamline their processes and give them more visibility to what's going on, and how long are people standing in a restaurant looking around doing nothing, and what else could you do with that time, and how else can you use that? So I think that's the newest thing for us. It's the most exciting thing. Again, all cloud managed, all easy to deploy. Set it up. You can go take a look if you're an SMB, owner, and you got three locations. And you're trying to figure out what's going on in each one of them. You can just pull it up and see what's going on anytime.
Well, I love that too because it builds on the installed base of cameras that are already there to a large degree, right? Yeah. And you just kind of build the software in. Yeah. So we're actually out of time, but as a final question, I want to know from each of you guys what your favorite pizza is. And I'll start. I've been on a kind of white clam and garlic kick lately. Which I think a lot of traditionalists might, scoff at, but I'm going with that anyway. What do you guys think?
I can't wait to hear how he answers this question. I love Neapolitan pizza. There's a great one in Providence.
Good answer. Yeah.
Well, I have to say the Canadian, like anything with Canadian back bacon is kind of what we tend to.
I think both great choices. For me, it's just classic cheese. A lot of people call it plain. I call it classic cheese. Yeah. It is, when it's done well, it is the best pizza that you could have, and it's the only way to really judge a pizza. And in terms of the pizzeria, what is your favorite pizzeria? I get this question asked all the time. It's a trick question. It's the one nearest to you.
Nice.
That's
Love it.
Awesome.
So you guys will all be available for questions from these fine folks?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So please join me in thanking the panel.
Thank you.
Thanks.